Beer Can Museum and Hall of Fame is located within a private residence in East Taunton, just a quick drive from the Old Colony History Museum. East Taunton, with its own zip code, 02718, is a bit removed from the hustle and bustle of downtown. For most of Taunton's history, this part of the city was made up of rural farmland. It has changed a bit since the days when Elizabeth Pole made her home here, as the airport and Massasoit State Park were laid out in the 20th century. If it still stood today, Elizabeth Pole's home would be under the waters of a man-made lake within the bounds of the state park, Lake Rico. Please note, this is not a traditional public museum, but a privately owned collection curated and cared for by Kevin Logan. To learn more about the museum's exhibits and offerings, or if you need some of Kevin's expertise, you can explore the website, Facebook page, or send an email inquiry to beercanmuseum@gmail.com. Please enjoy our virtual visit to the Beer Can Museum and Hall of Fame.
Hello. So this is the Beer Can Museum and Hall of Fame. My name is Kevin Logan. I'm the curator here and the chief bottle duster and can duster. The collection started in 1978 in Galveston, Texas. I was 14 years old and I went to a family reunion with my grandmother actually, and I lived in New England at the time, but we flew to the exotic state of Texas. And I met some second cousins that I'd never met before, and one of them was older than me and he attended Texas A&M University, and he had just started this great new hobby called beer can collecting, and he showed me his massive collection of about 50 cans. And as a 14-year-old, I had two older brothers who were old enough to drink, and my dad used to drink beer from cans. So I thought, hey, this is a hobby I could really get into. Well, my cousin gave me 6 cans, some of which are still here in the collection today. They were very exotic cans like Lone Star and Texas Pride and Buckhorn, which I have here. This is one of the first cans from the collection from 1978. And so I tucked those beer cans into my suitcase and I brought them back to Connecticut where I lived at the time. And that was where the collection began. Back in 1978, the hobby of beer can collecting was quite popular then. The Beer Can Collectors of America, which is the organization that we all belong to, was about 12,000 strong back then. It's at around 4,000 today. But beer can collecting as a hobby was really a hot hobby at the time. What I would say is that back then, before the days of smartphones, kids had hobbies, and we would collect baseball cards, and we would collect stamps and coins, and I was always a collector at heart, so I collected almost everything at the time. But as you can see, beer cans became my passion. I collected into my teen and college years, and I went off to college and I left my collection at my parents' house. Later on in life, I started a career, I got married, I bought a house, and I set up a man cave, as it were. But I dubbed it the East Taunton Beer Can Museum, sort of tongue-in-cheek initially, back in the late 1990s. But the internet came along and I set up a website, and I called the collection the East Taunton Beer Can Museum. Again, sort of jokingly at the time, but then the Los Angeles Times ran an article on food museums, and they included, it was a page 1 article, and they included my website. And from that moment on, the evolution into an actual museum started. It was a syndicated column. It ran in Chicago, it ran in Austin, Texas, it ran in Los Angeles, of course, and I began to get donations from around the world. And so from that moment on, I've evolved into an actual museum, and I've made an effort to curate an interesting collection, not just of beer cans, but of folk art and beer can advertising and beer can history, as well as some design changes throughout the history of the beer can. So the first beer cans that were available to the general public came out in 1933 was a test run. 1935 was the first year you could actually buy beer in cans. The first cans were available in Richmond, Virginia, and the brewery that produced them was not one of the big three at the time. The big three at the time were Pabst, Schlitz, and Anheuser-Busch. But the American Can Company, who had developed finally a lining that would hold the flavor of beer successfully, they contacted a middle-of-the-road brewer in Newark, New Jersey, called the Kruger Brewing Company, the Gottfried Kruger Brewing Company. Now, at the time, Kruger was struggling coming out of Prohibition. Their founder, Gottfried, had just died in 1926. The employees were not in the best of spirits, and so they initially said to American Can, we can't afford your fancy canning equipment, no thanks. So American Canning Company says, well, what if we install the canning equipment for free? You only have to pay us back if this is a successful experiment. So Kruger is the first brewery to put beer in cans. And so they began the experiment January 24th, 1935. They sell the first cans of Kruger beer, and within 3 or 4 months, Kruger has quintupled their beer sales. Consumers love beer in cans. The taste is as good, if not better, than draft beer. And so suddenly the big three breweries are noticing that a lot of their market share is being cut into. So within the next year, you see 30 additional breweries hopping on board. I should mention the first can is steel as opposed to the aluminum cans today. This original can had a flat top, had to be opened with a church key opener. In fact, every case of beer had to come with a church key opener at the time. And these cans weigh about 4 times what modern beer cans weigh. So it was heavy, but consumers no longer had to pay a deposit like they did on bottles at the time. So this was one of the first beer cans. The first of the big three brewers to jump on board was Pabst. Now Pabst was a little nervous that canning was still kind of a new experiment, so they didn't want to put their Blue Ribbon name, their flagship brand, on cans. So they started canning the Pabst Export beer, they called it. So this is the first Pabst can. Again, it's a flat top, has instructions on the top of how to open it, has instructions on the can. To open, place hand on can as shown, hook opener under rim, lift opener firmly all the way. The Pabst tap a can. So most of the early cans had opening instructions right on the side because the beer drinking public had no idea how to open this. So that was the first of the major brewers to hop on board. Schlitz is an interesting story. Schlitz decided to can, but they didn't install canning equipment. They used their existing bottling equipment, and they signed a contract with the Continental Can Company to use what's called a cone top can. You can see some of them here. Cone top beer cans could be filled using bottling lines. You didn't have to, you could use an existing bottle cap or crown to cap the can. So one of the Schlitz early cans was marketed as Sunshine Vitamin D beer. Who needs to go to the beach or lay out in the sun when you can just have a beer? So this is the first Schlitz beer can, and that was around 1935. Anheuser-Busch took a different approach. They waited an additional year, so it wasn't until 1936 that Budweiser appeared in cans. This is one of the first Budweiser cans. Again, opening instructions right on the can. This is known as the Eagle Claw can among collectors. Budweiser also produced cans during World War II, but they all had to be olive drab or camouflage green. There were about 30 different brewers during World War II that contracted with the government to send beer overseas to the troops, because tin-plated steel for use on beer cans here in the States was put on hold. Everything went towards the war effort. So some of the most coveted cans in the beer can collecting world are olive drab or camouflage cans. Most of them were lost in the jungles of the Philippines or Africa or in the oceans at Okinawa. few of them are out there, and they tend to sell for thousands of dollars nowadays. So that was the first, one of the first Budweiser cans. This is another type of cone top can. It's called a crown tainer. It's a two-piece can. A lot of people compare these to current day brake fluid cans. That's a Fitzgerald's Pale Ale out of Troy, New York. It's in excellent condition. Beautiful example of an early crown tainer. So that's another type of cone top. The original beer cans were all flat tops through the 1930s, 40s, even into the 50s. I should mention a big change came along in 1959 when Bill Coors introduced the first aluminum can in the marketplace. This is one of the first. It was a 7-ounce can. Bill Coors is often viewed as a great environmentalist. He was actually a great businessman. He was trying to save money, and he realized he could save on shipping costs and production costs by using aluminum, which is infinitely recyclable. So this is one of the first aluminum cans to hit the beer can market. Another big change that occurs in the early 60s is a gentleman by the name of Ermal Fraze from Dayton, Ohio. He worked for Dayton Tool Manufacturing Company, and he went to a cookout with some of his friends. And back then, as I said, all the cans had to be opened with the church key opener. They had flat tops. Well, nobody remembered to bring an opener to this cookout. And so Ermal was left having to open his beer on the bumper of his car. So he was an inventor, and he went home that night and he thought to himself, there has to be a better way to open the beer can. So he actually was the one to invent the first pull tab can. And the pull tab cans initially didn't have the ring pull. These are some of the first pull tab tops, looked like that. Eventually they developed a ring top. The problem with pull tabs, as some of us of a certain age remember, is that you would pull the ring top off, and in some cases you would put it in the can, and some people would accidentally drink it and it would get lodged in your gullet and you'd have to have surgery. Other people threw these down on the beach. Many of us cut our fingers and toes, including Jimmy Buffett famously in Margaritaville.
I blew out my flip-flop, stepped on a pop top. I cut my heel, had to cruise on back home.
So those were around until 1975. In 1975, another important modification, which we know to this day, we come up with the stay-on tab. It's a certain lever that pops the can open. The piece stays attached, and you don't have to litter. You don't have to cut your foot on this tab. And this is the industry standard to this day, is the stay-on tab. This was another sort of experimental button top can. You can sort of see it. It looks kind of neat and futuristic, but the reality is when you pop it open, you can get your finger stuck in there, or you could cut your finger. So it was short-lived, but Coors experimented with a button top can. So these are some Boston area vintage cans. I'm going to start on the left. It's Star Banner Ale. Star Brewery was located in Dorchester. In fact, one of the old brewery buildings is still there today, and there's an electrical supply company operating out of that. A lot of breweries in the late 1800s were operating out of Jamaica Plain or Roxbury. Stony Brook in the Jamaica Plain area offered a lot of great fresh, clean water. The Hoffenrefer Brewery operated for many years out of Jamaica Plain, and they produced a couple of these. They produced Boylston Lager beer and then Pickwick Ale. Hoffenrefer Brewery is one of the few breweries to successfully navigate the waters of Prohibition, and they did so by mastering the art of near beer. But they got very creative, and they tried different things to stay afloat during Prohibition, which didn't end until 1933. So one of the things they did was they put paper in front of the windows, and they brought in piles of dirt, and they literally grew mushrooms inside the brewery building. So in addition to making near beer, which they did quite well, they grew mushrooms, and they sold them to some of the local markets, probably at Haymarket and so on. Over here we have Harvard Ale. Harvard was brewed in Lowell, Massachusetts. The main building is now a Target store, but Harvard is notable in brewing history because one of the largest raids of the federal government during Prohibition took place at the Harvard Brewery. Harvard in 1925 was struggling to stay afloat like many breweries. They couldn't produce their usual beer or ale, so they would produce near beer. Harvard started to push the envelope a little bit, and they began to sneak more and more alcohol into their beer. Well, the federal government picked up on this and eventually raided the Harvard Brewery. Legend has it that the feds showed up and were knocking on the door, and the employees were scrambling and throwing barrels of beer out into River Meadow Brook, which is along where the Lowell connector is today. And supposedly when they finally knocked the doors in, 5 inches of real beer came flooding out. So that's Harvard Ale. Harvard Ale would also run a big ad in Harvard Square for the returning Harvard students every fall. Even though Harvard Brewing had nothing to do with Harvard University, the new students would show up in the fall and they'd see the big billboard for Harvard Ale, and I'm sure they thought they'd have to get a 6-pack of that. Over here on the right is Croft Cream Ale. Croft was brewing in Roxbury back in the day. There's no more brewery buildings left from Croft. There's some lofts that are there. I think it's the Heath Street stop on the Green Line today. But so these are Boston area breweries. This is Brockert Pale Ale. This is a cone top from Worcester, Massachusetts. My daughter lives in Worcester, and my soon-to-be son-in-law drove by the old building that was Brockert Brewing a couple of weeks ago, and he discovered there's a Haitian church operating out of the old bottling building. So some of the old breweries still remain. A lot of them have been torn down, but Brockert Brewing out of Worcester is still there. This is Dawson's Master Ale from New Bedford. This is a Royal Brew, and their trademark featured the King of Diamonds. It's an early cone top can from New Bedford. Another Dawson's can. This one is calorie controlled beer, brewed by our own process from the choicest seedless hops, barley, malt, and corn, established 1889. So again, that's New Bedford, Massachusetts. Flat top steel can, would have been opened with a church key opener. Going more to present day craft cans, this is Worcester Today, Wormtown Breweries in Worcester. They just did a Blizzard of 78 can with some fun artwork on it. This is from Cisco Brewers on Nantucket. The interesting thing about this can is you can scan the can and you can get a map of where all the sharks are currently located off the coast of New England. So that's Shark Tracker Light Lager. So that's getting pretty creative on the use of the beer can. You simply scan the shark's fin with a smartphone and you can see where the sharks are. So we have cans from more than 80 countries on display here at the museum. Some of the more interesting ones, in my opinion, are ones from Middle East countries, Muslim countries where they sort of frown on drinking alcohol. But we do have cans from some of those regions, including an Egyptian can, which features not just the pyramids, but some words in Arabic. I also have a Tunisian can, beautiful graphically, features Arabic writing on it. So those are some of the rarer international cans. We have cans from Ukraine. We have interesting cans from Cuba, Iceland. Another interesting can from overseas was donated by someone who was visiting Mount Everest Base Camp, and he actually got a hold of an Everest beer. This was a limited edition. They call it Beer from the Top of the World from Mount Everest. A few other countries you don't normally think of as being big beer countries, but we have some Namibian beer. This is from Namibia. I have cans from Mozambique, cans from Sri Lanka. This one particular can is sort of amusing. It says, Sando can work as a mild relaxant and can give a very satisfying experience. So that's a Sando stout from Sri Lanka. Lesotho, a lot of African cans. I had a visitor just last week who spoke Hebrew, and he actually helped me to do some translating on this Israeli can, which has a lot of Hebrew on the side of it. That's OK Beer from Israel. So we have some sets on display over here. The Pittsburgh Brewing Company out of Pittsburgh are well known in beer can history for producing a lot of commemorative cans, a lot of sports cans. In addition, they produced some historical cans that highlight Revolutionary War flags, interestingly enough. So, you know, sports fans can always find something interesting in the museum, but history buffs can also find there's a lot of history on beer cans, including the Pittsburgh Brewing Company. They actually produced a Taunton-themed can with the Liberty and Union flag on it. Naval flags began appearing during the early protests of the colonists against the motherland. In 1774, the townspeople of Taunton, Massachusetts, expressed their anger and rebellion against England by using the words Liberty and Union for the first time on their flag. It's actually featured on a beer can. I get a lot of donations from bikers. Harley Davidson is featured on a lot of beer cans through the years. In fact, they have their bike week every year in Daytona and at Sturgis. And so there's a lot of commemorative cans out there that feature Harley Davidson. This is Daytona 1989. I have a whole collection of Harley Davidson themed cans. One of the things we've really tried to focus on is enhancing the collection with modern cans and featuring the beer can designers and artists who are doing the artwork that's appearing on some of the newer craft cans. In fact, we have a collection of autographed cans, which is growing all the time. We have a new can from an artist out in Western Massachusetts who just did a special beer can for the Big E. Features the exciting slide that kids might remember from the Big E. So he autographed a can for the museum. So that's sort of a new direction we're taking at the museum, is adding artwork and featuring artists. One of my favorite sections is the novelty section. Anyone that collected Wacky Packs when you were a kid, we have an equivalent in the beer can world. Instead of Miller High Life, we have Swiller Low Life. This was a lighter holder. This is a small collectible novelty beer can. Instead of Lowenbrow, we have Lowbrow. Again, these were just novelty cans. You can find almost anything made out of beer cans, interestingly enough. These are salt and pepper shakers from Budweiser. This is a can that was formed into a drinking mug. A gentleman got this for me on his honeymoon. It's always an honor when someone's on their honeymoon and they think of the Beer Can Museum and make a donation. And then we have beer cans that are full of jelly beans. We have beer cans that came with t-shirts and boxer shorts. This is a beer can safe. You can hide your valuables in a Stroh's can out of Detroit. This is a transistor radio made out of a Budweiser can. So this can is from a series known as the Collective Arts Brewing in Canada. They feature artists on the side of their cans, and you can scan the can and be taken online to an online gallery. So it's a way for artists to get greater exposure and to have their work featured on beer cans. Sometimes breweries will get sneaky, and they might put a secret message on the bottom of their can. This was Narragansett's Town Beach can. If you look closely on the bottom, it says Free TB12 from the Free Tom Brady era. Beautiful artwork on some of these. Here's Mr. T. there. Some modern craft cans getting creative with their cans, including this one from Sweetwater Brewing, the trout. You put the cans together, it's like a puzzle. So several years ago, I got contacted by a gentleman in the Seattle area, and he said, "I have something that your museum might be interested in." And I said, "Do tell." And he said, "Well, I have a can that John Wayne used in one of his films." And John Wayne, of course, made over 200 films, so I'm not sure which movie it appeared in. But in Newport Beach, California, there's a luxury resort called the Newporter Inn. It's now a Hyatt. But for many years, it was a hangout for the rich and famous in Newport Beach, California. John Wayne gave this particular can, which he'd used as a prop in one of his films, to the bartender at the Newporter Inn. Well, they were excited, of course, and they glued it to the bar. The glue is still on the can. And for many years, this can was glued to the bar at the Newporter Inn. Eventually, in the early 90s, they renovated the Newporter Inn, and this came off the bar, and a collector got a hold of it. And as he got older and got rid of his collection, he reached out to me and he said, "I want to either give this can to the John Wayne Museum, which is in Iowa, or the Beer Can Museum in East Taunton, Massachusetts." So I had to make a pitch for this can, and I sent him a nice email back. Months went by, I didn't hear anything. I figured, well, I guess this is in Iowa somewhere. Well, one day I get home and there's a box waiting for me, and sure enough, the John Wayne can made its way to the Beer Can Museum. So my favorite can was one that I discovered when I was about 15 years old. I had just been collecting for a year at that point. And I was cleaning out a woman's workshop and basement. She was in her 90s, and she said, "You can keep anything you find." Well, I was cleaning her basement, and there was an old refrigerator which had been running for decades. And sitting in that refrigerator were two mint condition Schaefer World's Fair special cans, still full of beer, 1964. And so she probably wondered why this 15-year-old kid was taking the 2 cans of beer, but I explained that I was collecting beer cans. My brothers and I opened the beer can from the bottom, which is what collectors tend to do for display purposes. My older brother sampled the beer. I didn't. I was too young. It did not taste very good, but I ended up with 2 mint condition Schaefer World's Fair special. World's Fair took place in New York in 1964, which also happens to be the year I was born. So this can has always held a special spot in the museum as one of my favorites. I gave the other mint condition Schaefer can to my cousin in Galveston, the one who got me started in collecting in 1978. So that's the World's Fair Schaefer can. We try to not just include beer can history, but interesting beer can designs. This is a beer can orb from Suntory in Japan. It's really the only beer container that I have that's in orb shape. So this was actually a work of art from an artist in the Pacific Northwest. Her name is Liz Crane. She works in ceramics, and she did a show a couple years back called 99 Cans of Beer on the Wall. And these were all cone top designs. This is not an actual can, it's a work of art. And after her show got finished, she donated this particular one to the museum collection. And it's just a beautiful piece of art, which we keep behind glass. So one of the best parts of giving tours at the museum is when visitors make a connection with, for example, a brand of beer that their grandmother drank or that their dad drank. A lot of times people will see a Ballantine can or a Schaefer can, and it brings back memories of their childhood. A good example of that is an artifact, one of my favorite artifacts from the museum, which I received from a gentleman in San Francisco. And he sent me a Burgermeister music box made out of a beer can. Now the artifact itself is great, but the story behind the can is what's exciting. He says, please find and close the Burgermeister Music Box beer can. It belonged to my grandmother, Pansy Spring, 1893 to 1983. She was born in Sussex, Wisconsin, and lived her entire life in Richmond, California, where my grandpa was the telegrapher for the Santa Fe Railway. As a child, I remember she kept this on top of the refrigerator. I also remember she used to buy little half-side cans of Burgermeister, as my mother used to get after her for drinking the regular-sized cans. I'm so happy that I found a loving home for this item. So he sent not only the amazing music box, which I'll show you, but a picture of him, John Graham, with his grandmother at a tavern. And you can actually see the Burgermeister can on the tavern bar, and a picture of Pansy. So that's the music box, and it actually still works very well to this day. It was $3.50, and you wind it today, it still works as well as on the day it was first made. So that's the Burgermeister music box. A lot of times people ask me, what can do I get asked about more than any other beer can? And I'm going to tell you. It's the brother of Jimmy Carter was a well-known media hound by the name of Billy Carter. Billy Carter owned a gas station in Plains, Georgia, and the media picked up on his character. He was a very colorful character. And so there was a brewery called Fall City Brewery out of Louisville, Kentucky. They approached Billy Carter, and they said, hey, how would you like to put your name on one of our beers? We'll pay you $50,000 a year, licensing fees. And Billy happily signed on the dotted line. And so Billy Carter ended up touring and promoting Billy beer at the time. But the problem was Billy enjoyed Billy beer a little too much, and so he would drink too much of it and start to say things like, I actually drink Pabst Blue Ribbon at home. So the Billy beer can is the one I get asked about more often than any other can. Everybody thought it was going to be worth a ton of money. They made about 1 billion of them, so they're actually only worth about 50 cents. And at one point there were 4 different breweries cranking out Billy in 1977. Eventually, Billy Carter said Billy beer was the reason he quit drinking. So Billy cans, much like many of the Beanie Babies, aren't worth a whole lot of money today. But a lot of people have a 6-pack of Billy up in their attic and they think it's worth $1,000. It's always fun to have people from all walks of life come in, because everyone connects with something different. Be it a brand, be it a memory of a family member who drank Schlitz, or something of that nature. I had a gentleman from Dartmouth, Massachusetts come in a few weeks ago. He was in his 80s and he used to collect. And he and his wife came, and he had visited Ireland not too long before, and he saw the Smithwick's neon sign, and they had enjoyed Smithwick's in Ireland, and so it was just a happy memory for them. So that was kind of neat. The museum is currently in a private residence. That being said, we do occasionally offer tours to collectors or contributors to the museum, or members of the Brewery Collectibles Club of America. We certainly love to show off the collection. A lot of that's done online. We do have a website, beercanmuseum.org. We also have a YouTube channel with a lot of interesting content, which is Beer Can Museum and Hall of Fame. We're on Twitter as Beer Can Museum. Facebook, again, Beer Can Museum and Hall of Fame. A lot of content on there that's updated daily. We connect with a lot of fellow collectors, and breweries, and museums. We just did a collaboration with an aerospace museum out in Nebraska. We're lending them a can. They're actually a Smithsonian affiliated museum. So we do like to collaborate with other museums to enhance exhibits whenever we can.